Hello, thanks for tuning in. This is the second episode in where I talk about things that are basically killing archeage. In this episode I'm going to be talking about nations. So, I'm just going to dive straight into it. Nations are destroying servers in archeage. Simple as that. They were a good idea on paper. Originally the idea of a nation was to create an organised group that could contend for the endgame bosses, and it would have multiple nations per server, 4 castles, 6 castles. They could all contend over them and fight. But unfortunately, a declining player base has meant that the competitive PvP has declined to the point where there's only ever one nation per server, really. And if there is more than one nation per server, generally they just kind of make an alliance, similar to what happened on the new servers. I saw on the forums people talking about them making an agreement to not take each other's final castle so that nobody quits the game. While I agree that that is a good idea, we don't want people quitting. I think it's pathetic that the game has gotten to the point where people are basically having to allow people to have a free castle just so their nation remains intact to stop them quitting the game. Like, if the only thing keeping them playing the game is the fact that they're in a nation together, it's bad. What basically has happened on Archage, for anyone that isn't aware, is a nation system has been introduced, which allows a group of players to create a nation, and they can recruit from both factions, Harania and Nuia. What this has essentially done is create one super guild per server where they recruit the best players from both Harania and Nuia, all the PvPers, the healers, the Skull Knights, the leaders in PvP. They all join this one guild and they leave hollow husks of a player base on the factions. Harania and Nuia on most servers dies because all the good players either leave the server or join the nation or quit the game, and what's left is just a ragtag crew of people that are trying to find content. On Iana we have it quite nice. We have a larger than average amount of players, but it's very difficult to organise, and when we do successfully organise, we don't always have the key roles in the raid, such as the Skull Knights, the healers, and we have to bring the newer players, which don't really have the gear to fight these kind of opponents. So we are incredibly disadvantaged against the nation. This isn't just us, this is most players. And one of the big reasons why we're at such a disadvantage is the nation gets all of the content on most servers. I don't know about the 2 new servers. I haven't had much chance to really find out how they've been settling down. But before the 2 new servers came up, for quite some time now, there has been one nation pretty much on most servers dominating the majority of content. And it's pretty much, destroyed a lot of servers. The server I transferred from, Leviathan, had one nation called Dishonored. They had everything, all the content. Nobody could fight them. My guild back on there was the last competition they had, and we left and came to Iana. They allied with the Haranians after that because they didn't want more people quitting. And it's gotten to the point where nations have to start giving out freebies to people just to keep them from quitting the game. There are at least a few nice people, eh? But it's not the nation's fault. It's the game's fault for putting in such a system. They've created a one-way door where all servers are just going to pass through this point and they can't go back anymore. Where there's one super guild with all of the top players that want PvP, and what's left is just a few people here and there. The remaining players on the Haranian and Nuian sides usually lack the PvP leaders that are willing to organize raids. It's usually scattered guilds, multiple languages, and organizing events is very tricky. If events are organized, as I said, they usually lack the key parts. So it creates a bit of a, negative impact on the morale of players. And over time, most will move away from joining in these events. Or some will go and join the nation. And this is one of the biggest problems with nations. Just take the gold. They get 540 Lord coins per castle every 3 weeks. For 6 castles, that's what, like 3,240 Lord coins. At 50 to 60 gold each, that's between 160 and 200,000 gold. That is ridiculous money for every 3 weeks. Then you've got the land tax that they get that pushes that 200k higher. Then you've got all the bosses. The Abyssal alone. If you've got the Abyssal on farm, that's 30,000 gold. 3 times a week. Then you've got the Kraken. That's 5,000 up to 10,000. 3 times a week. Then you've got the DGS. That's 6,000 every day. And the list goes on and on. And this comes up to well over 600,000 gold every 3 weeks. Just between, on average, maybe 100 players. How can people compete against that? As fast as they're gearing up and trying to move towards this, the nation is making money hand over fist. You can't compete. They are so powerful with the people that join them from both factions that you can't fight them. There's no way to compete against this level of power. And people shouldn't be expected to, because it's not the fault of the player. It's not the fault of the nation. It's not the fault of anyone other than the developers, i.e. XL, that created this system and didn't put any checks in place to prevent this from happening. The original case with the pirates was that they had downsides of doing this. They couldn't really do trade runs. They were very limited in terms of what they could do on the east and west factions because of jail time. And it created limitations to what they could do. But right now with the nation, once you've got this level of power situated in a guild, they're free to interrupt every single GR, CR, Halsey. They dominate Mistmarrow. They dominate every world PvP event, every boss, everything. The Luskas, you name it. What can players do? What can the average player do? I'll tell you what they can do. They can struggle to find something else. And if they can't, they'll quit. They'll either leave the game and find a game where they can actually enjoy the end game, or they can participate in the fun activities, or they'll join the nation themselves and further strengthen what is already an overwhelming force. My character just went away again. How strange. But that's the point, guys. Right now, Archage as a game is great on paper, but what it lacks is practical application on the field, and changes need to be made to allow all the players of Archage to engage with all the content in Archage. Because if you don't allow people to engage in the content, what are they going to do? They're going to look for a game where they can engage in the content. And believe me, I have had so many people that I know quit the game and just go and play a different game. And it keeps happening. And based on the fact we see servers dropping off and the server merges and server evolutions, everyone knows that the player base is declining. It's not a secret. And unless something is done to stem the bleed of players, we're going to continue with this. In my next video, I'm going to be going over events and the updates to Archage and why they're very, very poor and are also pushing Archage further towards the brink of death. But yeah, nations, you know, all the best players from both factions, all the PvPers, and they make all the gold from all the world events. How can you fight that, you know? Well, that's all I've got to say about nations. Hopefully some people will have learned something. Hopefully people won't try to blindly defend nations, because, as I said, it's not your fault. At the end of the day, you're just engaging in the content that's available to you. It's not your fault. It's down to the game's designers to balance the game so that it doesn't completely block out the entire game from a large majority of players. It's not down to the players to make sure that everyone can engage in this type of content. Hopefully XL will see the light. Well, and I'll see you in the next video.